Most welcome back to the Manifesto podcast, and in particular, this edition of The Men Who Saved the West. We have together with us today Ralph Schöllhammer, Alexander Bard, Benedict Beckeld, and myself, Johan Gardebo. Not Carl Hegrell this time, because tonight might be the night when a new child is born, so to speak.
Carl is breeding. He's literally breeding. He's doing what you should do if you're a Western man today. He's saving the West through breeding. Well done, Carl, and good luck tonight.
So with the pronatalist statements taken care of, let's dive into this.
Let's just say this is genuinely today a transatlantic conversation, because Johan and Benedict are both in New York. Ralph is in Vienna and I'm in Stockholm. So we're literally two guys each on each side of the pond. I would love Benedict to start. He's sitting in New York. He obviously voted for Trump. He should really have both an American and Israeli flag waving right now. So I want Benedict's comments on what's going on at the moment.
Pardon my voice, I got a bit of a cold today. But anyway, yeah, just showing my proof that I voted here, which of course I'm using now proudly as a bookmark after the victory. So obviously there are many things to discuss to open the conversation. Maybe I would open by making the observation that this was a world election in many ways and not just an American election. Obviously, only Americans could vote, but it's an election that influences the entire world. Now, obviously, that's always to some extent the case, since the United States is still the most powerful nation in the world. But I would say that it was especially the case this time around because more than often, we saw now in very stark contrast the difference between various types of U.S. administrations. And I even had some friends and colleagues in Europe, nobody in this room, of course, but some other friends and colleagues in Europe who said that, you know, when I was kind of fretting about the election in the weeks and days leading up to it, I was saying that, yes, I do think probably Trump will win, but a Harris victory certainly cannot be excluded. And they told me that, well, you know, after all, it's just politics, you know, relax, life will continue and so on. And I told them that, well, this is kind of a post-historical way of thinking because this was in particular a German friend who said, nobody really cares who's the chancellor in Berlin. I mean, obviously, it's important for Germans. And it does have some influence also when it comes to European politics and so on. But the thing is, it's easier there to say that politics is just politics. Whereas depending on who wins in the United States, people around the world indirectly die or live as a result. And so it's when they say, oh, it's just politics, it's not life and death. Well, actually kind of is life and death. Fretting about it to some extent does make sense. We saw in very stark contrast what happens when America grows weaker and withdraws from the world stage. We have wars breaking out around the world. And I'm certainly not the only one, many others have been saying now for 20 years or longer that with a weakening United States, there will be more wars in the world. And so now it's easy to get very euphoric in the moment. And I see some people on the right now celebrating that, you know, wokeism is dead and okophobia is dead and the radical left is dead and so on. No, they're not dead. They're going to keep fighting, obviously. And so one mustn't lose oneself in the euphoria of the moment. But having said that, I still think that this makes a huge difference for the world and that the idea of peace through strength that Trump represents is one that will bring more peace to the world. And it's important, I think, also on that note to say that this sort of the Trump cult of personality that exists here, they tend to be mostly isolationists. And what most of them forget is that Trump himself actually is not an isolationist. He is much more of a peace through strength kind of a person, more in the Reaganite mold, I would say. And that is what's going to help keep peace, hopefully, in the world, whereas American isolationism never would. So I touched upon a couple of different points there, but I think maybe I'll start the conversation with those observations.
This has an immediate effect on Europe. The most important country in Europe is Germany. Germany is going to go to election on February 23rd, and Europe is in for the next big shock. It's going to be a landslide victory for the right, and the liberals are left government, so the liberals can make a government with the conservative Christian Democrats and probably even Alternative für Deutschland. I would love to have Ralph's take on what's going on, because I see a major ideological shift in Europe after Trump's victory from Brussels to Budapest. What does Ralph say?
Well, I probably wouldn't go that far, but I think kind of adding on to what Benedict has said, because I think it was, in a funny way, it was a life and death election. Because the question was, what kind of worldview is going to prevail? One that has a sense of optimism, right? That thinks that the future can be bright, that things can be turned around, that we are not on a ship that is sinking and we just have to decide, you know, what the what the orchestra is supposed to play as we go under, but that you actually wanna prevent the decline. And if you look at Trump, just real quick, because I think this is a lesson for the right-wing parties in Europe to learn, particularly the AfD in Germany, I think should take a look at this. My sense that Trump would win, as Benedict had said, that it became more and more possible, for me was once you could see he had fun. The last 4 weeks of the campaign, you could see him enjoy campaigning, whether it was the McDonald's thing, whether it was, his dancing to YMCA, whether it was the the garbage truck thing. And then it was funny. Like, he did funny stuff. You looked at this man and said, that's a funny guy, right? He was genuinely fun. Nobody thought about insurrection, January 6th. You looked at this and said, okay, that's hilarious. That's funny. And like at a party, you want to go to the person, you want to go to the group that is entertaining, where the jokes are being cracked, where the laughter is, and not where everybody's, staring in their glass, not saying a word. And this is what I believe the right has to learn in Europe as well. If the AfD would find its sense of humor, if generally the right in Europe would find its sense of humor, I think they would do much, much better in elections. Is this doom and gloom is part of the story? I mean, again, the title of our podcast is The Man Who Saved the West, and the fact that it needs saving is not per se the most optimistic message. But on the other hand, the fact that we believe that it can be saved is something that is very positive. And I think that comes always back to me as a crucial thing. You must be likable. And let me add on one last point to this. I think the Kamala Harris campaign had almost or slightly above $1 billion at their disposal. And I think Donald Trump had 360 million. Now, of course, Donald Trump has probably the highest level of name recognition around the globe. But nonetheless, it shows you there is a limit to what money can buy you. Because if money would buy politics, or if money could really decide elections as a causal factor or as a singular causal factor, you would not have had that result. He would not have won all the swing states. He would not have won the popular vote. And I think that's a very encouraging message.
Of course, Alexander can go on talking here that there's a difference between capital, what capital can buy you, and what attention actually is, which is not the same as capital. But speaking of attention, when I arrived here, my woman had got me this present.
Amazing.
Which I then took the opportunity of running from West Village up through Central Park to where we're going to have brunch. And if
you live to tell the story. You live to tell the story. If you want to
try to be, the Jewish experience, then you do that in New York, and then you'll be all the wiser from it.
I have a vintage Donald Trump Daddy T-shirt, just with Donald Trump and Daddy on it. So I'm not going to show it to you, but it's vintage. It's really valuable. So yeah, I think it's even smarter. But yes, about attention and capital. This is the other factor why this is a world election and a really historically important one. It's not the shift. The ideological shift was bound to happen anyway. We are having these conversations as between classical liberals and conservatives to have the conversation, are we going to save the Western society and get it going again and solve problems like demographics and things like that? That's why we have these conversations. But yes, it was an attentionalist election in the sense that Donald Trump proved that with a fourth of the budget that Kamala Harris had, he still beat the shit out of her. And we know exactly why that happened. She performed like an hysterical refrigerator. I woke up once during the entire election campaign and finally heard a fantastic speech from a Democratic convention on TV. And I said, what? Has Kamala woken up and finally can give a proper speech where she's likable? And I turned up and it was Kelly Rowland from Destiny's Child opening for Kamala Harris. Why didn't they take Kelly Rowland? She gave a fucking speech. She's warm and funny. And then Kamala Harris came out and was this dredging, boring, self-absorbed, hysterical refrigerator. And I think at the end of the day, the election was, even with a guy like Putin, who do you send into the room with Putin? Anybody would still prefer Donald Trump over Kamala Harris when it comes to that specific meeting. And that, I think, decided it all. It was 7 million votes margin at the end of the day in favor of Donald Trump. But the other factor is precisely the shift from capitalism to potentialism. This election was clearly won by the technology oligarchy of Silicon Valley, or Austin, or wherever they're located now. A German guy called Peter Thiel and a South African guy called Elon Musk and their PayPal mafia went in all behind Donald Trump, knowing he would win. Certainly, he won without them, but he won with an even larger margin. And people are finally realizing that there's a libertarian streak as well to Donald Trump's message. And by cutting down unnecessary government, America can now be the pioneer of government in the Western world, which is deeply, deeply needed. And here, Here's the trick. What America is now presenting to the world and to us in Europe, we are slaves to America for the simple reason we don't have any AI in Europe. We can only build on the 6 massive American AI platforms. America rules this century madly. The only competition is China. And China decided 10 years ago, through Xi Jinping's massively disastrous Stalinist decision in 2014, that he was going to run a Stalinist dictatorship in China with him at the top. Since then, every data in China, including TikTok on all American kids, goes straight into the Chinese Communist Party central computer. That means any AI relation of any kind in China has to go through that central Communist Party computer. That delays information, and the information is censored. And that's not what AI is about. AI is about the pursuit of truth. And the brilliance, again, of America is that it understands splitting power. And Silicon Valley just done it in front of us all. They waited for Elon Musk to jump on board with XAI so they can have 6 different competing AIs. And they know very, very clearly that if they try to turn them into one AI, we'll leave them in 2 seconds and walk out. But right now, American AI is a totally superior alternative to Chinese AI. For anybody in the world, it will be better, it will be stronger, because it will be more truthful, and it will therefore also be faster and more creative. And right now, AI is taking over the world, and we're preparing for a world where human beings have to share everything with AI. And we know the AI could be a bomb, and we know the AI could liberate us into potentials we never could imagine. That's what really happened in 2024. We already had the first AI election. And this is Trump. Yeah, he is, of course, representing the tech lobby in Washington because he's himself a member of it and believes in it. Look at the crypto exchanges. Bitcoin has gone through the roof this week. Why? Because finally we got a president who's actually bothered to understand the potential of crypto. That's just one of many, many examples. Right now in Sweden, even we are losing out right now because all the money in the world is being sucked into the United States. Wall Street goes through the roof. The dollar goes through the roof because people know, anybody who does business knows that right now America's back in force when it comes to world business.
So many different areas that we broach on now. What happens with Europe and our regulation regime as opposed to hopes of a new innovation regime in the US. The geopolitical aspects that we touched on briefly, and obviously the looming superpower conflict with China that Alexander ended with. And sorry, the attentionalist aspect I think is also a very interesting one. But let me start with one of the things that I was personally concerned with regards to the election, that if it had been more of a close race, then you would have ended up with hypercharged version of election fraud accusations. And perhaps if you want to dial back even further, if Donald Trump had actually been assassinated, you see where I'm going with this, like the actual risk of this being the disunited States of America, and this larger tug of war between the federal level and the state level. Do we want to touch on that as well before moving on? Like what the state of the US internally could have been before we go into the world scene?
This is down to the Democrats right now. They have a choice. They can either go even more sort of woke radical and become completely irrelevant. That's what's happened if the Quad take over or something like that, which is still a likely scenario. They're strong within the party, even if people hate them. The other option is that maybe we are a party who should try to gain back power. In that case, they have to find some sexy, funny, like Ralph said, funny, humorous package that can go into the 2028 election up against a Rubio-Vance alliance, because that's what the Democrats are going to, what the Republicans are going to have. Personally, I'm a huge fan of Marco Rubio. I think as foreign minister or secretary of state in America, this is the best news in a long, long, long time. He knows the priorities. It's China and the mullahs of Iran. And he just had the question. He walked out of the building. It's clear as the new secretary of state. Somebody comes up and says, what about Gaza? And his answer is so sharp. Gaza is terrible. It's horrible to see those pictures of those people dead in Gaza. And it's all Hamas' fault. Thank you. And he walked off. Period. That's the new American foreign policy. Right there. And of course, Ukraine, Russia is the proper two-state solution. There has to be two-state solution. Some kind of amicability has to be reached. And even Zelensky today, after having conversations with Trump and Musk, declared today that within a year there has to be peace because everybody's sick of it and we're tired of Ukrainians and Russians fighting each other, and there has to be some kind of amicable peace between us so we can start trading again. So Russia's out of the way. I think clearly the Rubio government will try to get Russia to split from China and Iran and therefore break the current power that China has. That's the most important issue right now for Rubio. So Democrats over and done with, or they can choose to be more Republican, which is the way you do it if you want to get power back. Look at Labour in the UK. You have to be more of the winner if you want to win.
Ralph Benedict, do you agree? Can the split in the country or the strife in the country be reduced to the struggle between the Republicans and the Democrats?
I would maybe add my one, maybe slightly less sanguine than Alexander, although again, we see eye to eye on it largely. The one concern I have in this regard is simply that when we say that the Democrats have a choice, right, that they can either continue to radicalize and thereby become irrelevant or moderate and have somebody with a little more humor, a little more charm and so on. My problem or my concern there, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but my concern there would be that as so often we in this country vote, it happens in other countries too, but I think it's a problem we tend to have more than many other countries, is that we vote based on personality and so on. We vote for friends, so to speak. We don't vote for presidents. And my concern is that somebody, as not necessarily Ocasio-Cortez herself, but somebody as radical as she is, and that's why I'm still a bit concerned that I don't think the Democrats, that if they continue to radicalize or if they stay as radical as they are now, that automatically spells their defeat. It might, but I'm not quite as sanguine about that as perhaps Alexander is. But I hope you're right.
I'll give you one example of why there's a turning point here historically when it comes to politics and media. Clearly, social media is not driving politics. Mass media is dead and over. So this is the shift from capitalism to potentialism and politics already happening. Yes, Ocasio-Cortez can play that card very well and look very friendly and sexy and all that. But here's the problem. The best one-liner in the commentary after Trump's landslide victory in America was a black woman from Michigan who was a member of the Democratic Party but had voted Trump. That's the most interesting Trump voter you could talk to right now. And she was very, very easy with the whole thing. She said, well, you know, there was Donald Trump and he was crazy. And there was Kamala Harris and she was preachy. And you know what? If I have to pick between crazy and preachy, I pick crazy. I think the time, it's not woke. People don't get the concept, to be honest, about it. Most people don't. We get it, but it's more like academic. It's the preachy attitude. I think Barack Obama is over. I think Barack Obama invested so heavily in Kamala Harris' campaign and killed himself. He could not convince the black men to vote for his sister, Kamala, because he never had that capital in the first place. He was the black guy who was loved by white liberal voters. That's over. Barack Clinton, over. Cannot be open again. The question is then what comes behind. Well, Gretchen Whitmer obviously turned down to run a 2-woman ticket with Kamala Harris, which is the obvious one to do. She and Pete Buttigieg probably get along really well. I think that's the future of the Democratic Party if they decide to go moderate, and Gretchen will sit and wait to see if that happens. She's controversial enough already with all the woke people anyway, so she can't move in that field. She's the perfect moderate Democratic candidate for 2020, and she clearly passed on the option to run into the mess in 2024 after Biden resigned to wait for 2028, knowing Trump would win. And he's the perfect opponent because he won't be a candidate again. So whoever comes after Trump, say advance, is what Gretchen Whitmer is going to start trying to merit herself towards. And if she wants to win, she better be crazy and not preachy, because the preaching thing is what people are sick of. This is what we'll see in Europe too. The new thing that's clearly a case of intentionalist politics is that nobody wants to be changed. No voter wants to be told they have to be a different person. This is the radical democratization of the internet. Everybody can now speak for themselves. Everybody has a mandate to be themselves. And Donald Trump has never tried to change a single human being. He always said, I'm with the people, I'm with the people, I'm with you guys, wave the flag, and go out there, with the motor fairs and whatever he could think of it that was popular with Americans when he was young. And we know it's at the fairs Americans find themselves. And he found the working class and the middle class and he won the election. Now, this is the thing with Trump. The lesson to learn from Trump is that he uniquely didn't try to change human beings. I think the preacher is overdone with historically and can no longer win U.S. elections. And this is the lesson Democrats must learn. So that's my response to that. Ocasio-Cortez could be potential candidate to win the election. Never.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's a lot of truth in what you say. But I guess what I would say is that the lack of preachiness doesn't necessarily obviate the radicalism. I mean, those two can coexist, I would say, but we'll see.
But then you won't win the elections. Yes, if the Democrats...
saying, well, but somebody who is that radical but has more charm and isn't as preachy and shrill in the sense that Kamala was preachy and shrill.
I think charm and preachy cannot be combined. And I think Gretchen won me over as a potential future president when she was sitting.
This is what I mean.
Yeah, she was one of the talk shows when Biden resigned and it was open for Kamala. And Kamala would obviously play the card internal in the party that you cannot bypass me. You must give me the job because I'm black and woman. But
I'm saying the radicalism and the charm can be combined. The radicalism and the charm can be combined.
Because radicalism in itself is preachy. Okay,
Not
wait a
necessarily.
second. Gretchen was on one of the talk shows, Jerry Fellow, one of those talk shows. She was one of the talk shows. Right after Biden decided, she was obviously invited to make a comment, and she was asked, so what do you say about Biden and come out of what's going on in the White House right now? And he turned over to Gretchen, and she looked over to host and said, I really love your tie, and fixed his tie. That was brilliant, politically brilliant. It's just like, I am above those intrigues. I can wait for my moment in time when that moment comes, and it must be served to me. And you know what? I don't believe in them.
But I think somebody like Obama is an example of the combination of radicalism and the lack of preachiness. I mean, he might seem preachy in hindsight, but nobody really perceived him as such at the time in 2008. And I think that Obama is really the one who broke the country, not Biden. Biden is just a continuation of that. So that's the kind of a new kind of Obama figure that I'm concerned about.
I disagree, because Obama built his alliance on the minorities against the white heterosexual man. Maybe didn't say so explicitly, but he did, and that's exactly what preachy is. It comes from the minority teaching the majority demonstration.
Yeah, but people didn't perceive him as preachy, I'm saying.
True. But yeah, subconsciously, I'm sure they did. But yeah, for sure.
But with regards to the Democratic Party, what's interesting, or if as its enemies would call it, the machine, that is the approach to politics that we figured out what needs to be done. Now the rest is just management from here on out, essentially. And I think in that respect, what's interesting about the attentionalism of Trump and the MAGA movement at large, which of course by now can be said to be more of a model. I mean, if Kamala had won this one, then you could try to explain away the MAGA movement, which will now survive regardless of how Trump fares. But the reform of the machine, what will come out eventually, similar perhaps to the kind of reform that the Democratic Party underwent when the Clintons came in. How quickly that will go can, of course, be interesting to look at. But what I'm concerned about when it comes to the civil strife or civil war potentials in the US has more to do with, on the one hand, the material aspects and the economic, that is the likelihood that the US can actually conduct any reform that is meaningful. And one example of this would be that you need, in a way, probable scapegoats if you don't have any means of reforming the country. So both the Republicans and the Democrats would look for scapegoats, obviously not finding the same scapegoats, but you find that you realize allegory. But with regards to attention, I think what's interesting is the existential component of a country that less today than was the case 20 years ago has any overriding metaphysical meaning around it, or rather it changes and is more, I realize Alexander might not appreciate me calling it pathic, but there's this eschatological element to it. So obviously we had the BLM movements. Before that you had some sort of climate, and then feminism or migrants. All these movements seem to replace each other once they reach the cusp of being realized or the contradictions become apparent. And I agree that whatever might be called or bracketed woke will probably recede now from the Democratic Party and probably large parts of the progressive segments of the population. But a more entrenched and easier defended version might be the calls for fascism. I understand that bringing that up from an analytical point of view seems like noise, but I don't think that the old political language has as of yet died, and many of these movements can probably survive simply by being the negation to whatever the MAGA movement is. And that, I think, can still drive this civil strife within the country. Do you agree with this assessment, or is it irrelevant even if it's true?
You missed two things, John. People get tired of things. This is a media society. They're tired of woke. They're tired of climate. The only reason climate became the biggest issue in the world because people were tired of the bomb, because the bomb is more serious than the climate. So we don't talk about the bomb any longer because we talked about it so much in the 80s. We got sick of it. This is the problem for the left, is that they go on these missions that are going to last for 100 years to change people and change the world into a better world. And right now, the word for that is climate. Right now, we're sick of climate. We don't want to hear it anymore. We don't care. Yeah, of course, there are more floods or whatever. So what? That's what Trump won. So I think the problem for the left is that their preachiness and finding that mission is that once the mission is out there and they think they gain ground and they get some attention and guilt trip people into believing they're right and therefore vote for them. Once you get to that point for the left, it turns out that they also live with the same media logic that everybody else has. And Donald Trump got it. He's nothing but media. He's a fucking TV show. He just moved into the White House. That's why he wins. So the problem is you get sick and tired of their preachiness because it's tiresome to hear because you've heard the topic 1,000 times and it doesn't change that much. I think personally, climate is over and done with for the simple reason that nobody did more for climate in the world than Elon Musk. And Elon Musk's solution is this is not a political topic, this is a technological topic. Now, if you move climate from politics to technology, you've killed it as a political issue. You killed the possibility for the left to drive climate. That's going to be shock for climate. Rather, I think if you're looking for a scapegoat, that's probably quite deserved. I want to talk about what happened in Europe while this election was going on. Kemi Badenoch got the job. She's the new leader of Conservatives. It's no longer shocking if she has a conversation with Farage. What's happening in the UK while Starmer is making a fool of himself? Well, Kemi Badenoch is going to fight the Blob. That's a more funny, quirky version of the deep state. So I'd love to hear Ralph's take on that. What do you say about Kemi Badenoch and where's the UK heading, for example?
From my context in the UK, I get somewhat mixed messages. What you see, I think, Alex, you're correct, right? That the people get bored. You also see that, and this would be the pessimistic take, also, Johan, connecting to the thing that you said previously, that maybe for some, not for all, but I think for some, it also came too late a little bit, particularly among some of the, like Connor Tomlinson, who's a good friend of mine, is a good example of this. Like they think that even Kemi Badenoch, too soft, she's not as bad as Rishi Sunak was, but she's also not the real game changer. You see now, and not people I think that we would necessarily associate with, but even the United States, you see people saying, look at who Trump is bringing in. Like Alexander is very excited about Marco Rubio. I'm also very happy about the pick. But you see many saying, you see Marco Rubio, that's just yet another proof that it's somebody who is quote unquote from the establishment. So we'll have to wait a little bit and see if there have been so many false prophets, let's put it this way, that particularly on the right, there's a certain frustration, which does not mean that they cannot be proven wrong. And the other issues, we have to be very careful as well. If you would have told anybody in 2008, after Barack Obama was elected, if you would have said, you enjoy your moment, guys, because in 8 years, you're going to get Donald Trump. And then 4 years later, you're going to get Donald Trump again. Everybody would have said, you're mad. Like if you could have, like, they said, the betting markets. If you could have placed a bet on Donald Trump in 2008 for 2016, you would be like, the odds would have been insane, like what you would have gotten out of it. And we have to be careful because, Alexander, you made a great point about Barack Obama, but Trump has a similar problem. The attractiveness or the appeal of Trump cannot be transferred to somebody else. So some people who hope it's going to be Barron Trump or Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump, I don't think that's going to work because, again, as Alexander said, people get bored. I think the Americans have an instinctive rejection of dynastic approaches. So the idea to have first Trump the older and then Trump the younger, maybe you could do this in the UK, but not necessarily in the United States. And if we leave the UK for a second and look to Germany, yeah, Alexander is right. There will be a right-wing shift on the 23rd, but my fear is it will be a right-wing shift, particularly to what I call the lukewarm conservatives. And Friedrich Merz already has said no coalition with the AfD, but maybe a coalition with the SPD and the Green Party, which is then now we have a left-of-center party, and then we have a kind of slightly less left-of-center party. But it would need something like it happened in the US. That's a great thing about the US electoral system. Donald Trump has significant control now with this election win, both in Congress and the presidency. But that's very hard to repeat in the kind of parliamentary system that the Germans have, unfortunately.
I would just add that I think Germany could go the way Sweden did in this case, which is like, yes, the conservative part of the establishment says, I will never, ever talk to the Sweden Democrats. And what then happened was Sweden Democrats got so many votes in the election, they became an even bigger party than his own conservative party was. Ulf Kristersson became the prime minister, and he sat down with Jimmie Åkesson and started talking in public. And the Sweden Democrats decided to be supportive of the new government, which means they can still play the opposition card, and therefore they have more influence than anybody else in Swedish politics. This is very likely to be the case for AfD. If AfD ends up being the second or even the biggest party in the election in February, then Merz has to give up on any anything is said during the election campaign. So we'll see what happens in Germany. It's probably just Sweden, but 5 years later. Also, if you say the Greens and the Social Democrats literally would be wiped out, that's an entire different map. And it's not unlikely, considering how incredibly unpopular Olaf Scholz is right now.
No, that's true. And as we have learned in the American election, polls have to be taken with a grain of salt. Although if I look at the continental Europe situation, we had elections in Austria on September 29th, and the polls were within 2 or 3%, so they were very close. So currently, I think the CDU is at 31%, the AfD is at 18%, the SPD, the Social Democrats are at 16%, and the Greens are at 11%. So let's say that maybe the CDU is a little bit overestimated in the polls. They might get 29%, the AfD might make 22%, but again, there would be enough for a right-wing coalition, which I think is what the German people want. But we just had this experience in Austria. The people want a right-wing coalition in Austria, but the president decided not to give the right-wing party that won the election the mandate to form a government. So they're out of the government. I think in the German-speaking world, we move slower than the Swedes because we constantly have this, historical memory, and there's a Nazi lurking behind every corner, and we have to be very, very careful about this. And that might be true, it might not be true. But I think the pragmatism that the Swedes had. Look, I mean, just as a side note, but an important one. Sweden is, I think, one of the few countries that did the one logical thing in their pension system. They indexed it to average life expectancy. No other country in the world is willing to do this. I think Sweden, when welfare and socialism went too far in Sweden, the people and the companies revolted, and you made significant structural reforms. I think Sweden, Denmark, Norway, which is, of course, a little bit exceptional due to its resource riches, but you guys are very pragmatic. The Germans have shown over the last 30 years, they're not pragmatic. When the going gets tough, the Germans get ideological. Like somebody else gets pragmatic and says, all right, this isn't working, let's try something else. But the Germans tend to double down. So I think it will take a little bit longer for them to rearrange themselves as reality, which has always been the big German problem. I mean, Benedict, as somebody who did his PhD in Heidelberg, knows very well about this. That German philosophy is not necessarily the philosophy of understanding the world. It's the philosophy of challenging the world, which is great in many ways, but of course also problematic when you try to design a political program on that grounds.
That's actually how I ended up in Heidelberg, because I had first walked into the university, one of the main university buildings in Heidelberg, and saw quotes on the wall in Greek from Sophocles and so on. And then I walked into the Humboldt in Berlin, and the first quote on the wall I saw was from the famous quote from Marx about how it's important to change the world. And so Heidelberg it was. I decided on the spot.
And both you and me are here.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny how things change. It's still, New York is still the Rome of today in terms of attracting. But anyway, yeah. So as much as some Europeans would like to deny it, the enormous cultural effect that elections, not just elections, but various events in the United States has on Europe, I think Donald Trump's victory will help certain segments of the right in Europe to become a little more emboldened by that, which I think obviously is a salutary thing. But also, as to Ralph's point earlier, also about how it's a bit of a lukewarm right. I mean, if we look at Badenoch again in the UK, now the so-called conservatives, the Tories, are bragging about how they have a black female as a leader, which of course only shows the extent to which the left has won. It's like the frontier. You retreat further on the frontier. Then you have a little victory on that frontier, and everybody celebrates. Look, we had a little victory, but forgetting how far they have already retreated back. And I think that's a big problem. I mean, even Cameron bragged when Theresa May became prime minister that now we're leading 2-0 over Labour because we've had 2 women and Labour has had 0. And that this is just a continuation of that. When we speak of the right, we have to also, I think, distinguish pretty carefully which right we're speaking about.
Can I interject here then? Unless you want to go, Alexander. Because I think this is a good segue on Benedict's point to what Alexander began with the question of the shift from Brussels to Budapest. And I think, Benedict, what you point to, what is the right in policy terms or in political leadership terms, then woke is then, I would posit simply the algorithm that it is time for token group to do arbitrary thing because current year. And in that sense, of course, you could criticize both the new Conservative Party leadership and indeed many other right-wing parties in Europe for playing that. In a way, it also is relevant with regards to populist movements, seeing as Italy's government is seem to be perfectly compatible with, or at least pragmatic towards, Brussels politics. But what I think is interesting in bringing up Budapest more than Fidesz is more what would be the right in this sense is that there's a possible now with proper time and space difference from the Second World War, and it's sort of geographic stalemate that Europe has been in, if not ideological, is a return of Mitteleuropa. And I don't say this just to make Ralph happy, but an understanding of whatever is the future of Europe is not a geist or an idea moving through time, but something that has very much to do with the space itself.
There's one country in Europe that has had continuous economic growth for the past 20 years every year, even during the corona and even during the financial crisis. That's Poland. Poland is the only country now where all sides love Trump. Poland only has one issue. They want to secure that Russia doesn't get close to the Polish border. The day Lviv falls into Russian hands, that's when the Poles give up on the Americans. So Trump probably knows that as well. So Donald Tusk has already visited Trump knowing he would win the election. So that's already happened. Hungary might be more interesting, but it's also smaller. It's more think tanky, more radical in many ways, probably more conservative, whereas I find Poland to be slightly more liberal and more urban. But what's really going on in Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary right now is that they get the self-confidence of being the logically most interesting parts of Europe, and the rest of Europe is falling in line. I find that incredibly interesting. And I think this is the payback for having introduced the poll tax in the 1990s and far smaller governments than Western Europe has. I think Kemi Badenoch is into one thing here, which is very interesting. And that what does the establishment do when guys like us and the people speak and we win? What do they do to fight us back? Because I'm totally convinced that Kemi Badenoch is onto something with Blob. Aron Flam and I launched it here in Sweden. We call it Blob, but the same concept. I think what happened over the last 50 years is that the vast majority of talents who were on the right walked into business. They became engineers and businessmen, and certainly technology today is driven by a bunch of libertarians who want to change the world through technology and allow people to do whatever they want. That's the driving mechanism of technology. America dominates completely. It's also found in Scandinavia, a few places in Europe, but basically it's an American mode, and it's got to take over the world. But the establishment is the public sector, and it's bureaucrats and its administrators. And of course, with our high tax rates in Western Europe, we have the biggest fucking bureaucracies and administrations we've ever seen since Ming China and the pharaonic Egypt. It's just ridiculous. It will kill us eventually. It's incredibly costly and delivers very little. The productivity gets smaller every year. The costs rise all the time. So the leftists, the talent of the left, have all become bureaucrats and administrators. In Sweden, it's absolutely obvious because the left here is bureaucratic, administrative, feminine, female, and want to protect the public sector, raise taxes even further. Whereas the right here is much more radical, is now male-driven. Trump won all the male voters. He won the Latino, the black voters. He won the young men. The young men were his victory card. Why? Because the young men want to work hard, they want to be entrepreneurs, they want to make money, and they want to go into the private sector. So what do we do with the blob? Is there a blob in Austria? Is there a blob in New York? Is there a blob in America? What do we do with the establishments in New York and California? How do they react to Trump's election victory, knowing the Republicans could easily keep power in America for the next 12 years? What do these establishments in California, New York do? A lot of them are opportunists. They're likely to change their minds to save their careers. But what do we do? I mean, this is why Elon Musk's really radical take on trying to slash government in America and prove to the world it can be done, that Javier Milei does in Argentina successfully at the moment, and the Beckeld brothers have done in El Salvador. This could be done in America. And next year, we got not only Merz coming, we got Pierre Poilievre winning a landslide election in Canada. Canada is going to go to the right of America. So I'm interested in when we get these victories that we're obviously going to have, because I don't see any talent out there coming from the left. I don't see any charisma coming from the left. I see all the charisma is on the right. They're either liberals or conservatives. We're going to win the political struggles. But the question is, what will the establishment do sitting on their safe public sector jobs to keep themselves in those positions? And how will we react to this enormous blob we got across Europe today? My point is that Poland and Hungary doesn't have it. This is the problem with France, Germany, Britain, even Scandinavia, these huge blobs. And they will fight back when they start losing their power.
I mean, that fighting back is already happening. And these are sometimes local stories that should be much bigger. I give you one quick example of what recently happened in Germany. The Green Party, and also, by the way, the Liberal Party, they have hired an organization that uses artificial intelligence that does nothing but canvass the internet all day for critical social media posts about them or their politicians, and then they go ahead and sue those people. And the effect of this is not just that you sue people because they say something horrible. Many of them don't say something horrible. It's just, there was just this recent case in Germany where a guy whose daughter has Down syndrome was raided by the police because he said, he used Benedict will know the German term, he said that Robert Habeck is a Schwachkopf, which is a mild form of calling somebody an idiot. Like, it's not even, it's not even like a massively offensive term. This is something you say, among friends. You say you're a little bit of a Schwachkopf, nobody will be offended. But it has a chilling effect, right? And it's the government actively acting against the people. The very ones that constantly talk about defending democracy have become the biggest threat to it. And it's precisely what Alexander is saying. They know they no longer have the charisma. They no longer have the figures, the populists, if you want, that can win elections. So they try to another topic we have to talk about at some point. So they try to ban the AfD in Germany, to try to get Le Pen into prison in France for absolutely frivolous reasons, just as the lawsuits were in the United States against Trump. And the only reason why those lawsuits did not go as far as they could is because the Democrats were so stupid that they believe that the only guy whom they can defeat is Donald Trump. The second time, by the way, they thought this. But this is, Alexander is absolutely right. I think we need to use different, not we, but the kind of others who also have this debate, because deep state doesn't sound so conspiratorial. But in fact, it's just very simple. You have a status quo elite. They realize that the people no longer like the status quo, and that they are gradually getting options for parties, for political leaders who also want to change the status quo. So those status quo powers do everything they can to maintain the status quo, silencing the opposition, banning or trying to ban other parties. Or, by the way, what happened in the UK just a couple of days ago, when they visited the Telegraph journalist Alison Pearson for what they call non-crime incidents. I mean, I'm so sorry. I know people, when I tell these friends, they don't believe it. Because it's not, but you have the police knock on your door and they say, Alexander, Mr. Bart, can we talk to you? And you say, well, why would you like to talk to me? And they say, well, we had a report about you committing a non-crime incident. I mean, the first thing you're going to say is, well, then what does the police do here? And so it's completely, it sounds absurd, but this we are in interesting and dangerous territory. Because going back to what Alexander said, the battle between the Blob and whoever fights against it, whether it's against Trump, Musk, the AfD, the Reform Party, the potentially new Tories, Giorgia Meloni, the conservatives in Poland, Viktor Orban, take your pick. We don't yet know if they're winning. This is the struggle that's currently going on, and it is unclear how it's going to end. We, of course, try to make a contribution that the right side is going to win. But as Alexander correctly said, I think we should not underestimate the willingness of the entrenched status quo establishment, what they are willing to do to maintain their position.
It's like the preacher preaches and we don't submit to him. Therefore, he sues us and persecutes us and sends the police after us for not submitting to him. That's all there's to it. There's nothing else to it, right? And this, of course, what the Blob does. And of course, first of all, we had a guy called Björn Wiman. He's a columnist at Dagens Nyheter here in Sweden, which is the leading Swedish daily morning newspaper. He's the biggest columnist they got. And of course, if Trump wins the election, his comment is back, this is a big threat against democracy. No, it is democracy. We just saw it. This was what democracy is. Donald Trump has nothing played anything but the Democratic card. He won the vote. He won the people. He won the confidence. He's going to rule America. And by the way, he won a landslide. He got the Senate and the House of Representatives too, because that is democracy. The people have spoken, you idiot. These guys are not interested in democracy. They're interested in their own positions. And they win and gain the position by having a specific ideology. And that ideology they fight for because they're tied personally to the ideology. And they fight with that ideology so they can stay in the preacher mode. And I think what this is my proposal, which is kind of good news, is that I think the Trump victory proves now that the end of preachiness is here. And preachiness was all there was in a feudal society. The king, when he was a dictator, was nothing but preaching. Stalin is the ultimate preacher. Yeah, he changed his messages all the time, but whatever he said was right and you had to follow it. It had tons of ideology. It was always showing books around him and wrote his own books and things and quoted Marx, Lenin, Stalin, the trinity of communism, blah, blah, blah. You must believe in this, otherwise I kill you. And if you believe in it, but you are more useful dead, then I'll kill you anyway. Stalin is over. And these guys have no interest in democracy. They don't come from democratic roots. They come from a left that never cared about democracy. It's only 30 years ago that most socialists did not believe in democracy at all. They only believed in democracy as long as it benefited their purpose, as long as it benefited their mission. Now, when they don't win elections any longer, they're not going to stay loyal to democracy if they don't win the elections. They're going to turn against it. And they have, what they have is the machine. What they have is this great takeover of government institutions. So even if you put a liberal or conservative into the ministerial post and give him or her 4 years to run, every fucking employee they're bossing over is a leftist. That's the point with the Blob. And I think the war against the Blob is next. And the Poles have done it twice already, back and forth. But at least they know in Poland that the people you appoint will keep your message going even when you're fired. And that's the best thing you can do during an election, is just appoint as many people of your kind as possible. So if you lose the election, then your guys are still in there and they still have the ultimate power and they'll control and they'll nudge down the new minister who's a liberal conservative until he will not do anything at all and socialism will prevail.
But now I think, Alexander, now you come to the actual potential consequences of the US election for Europe. Because if Trump is capable of seeing this through, because everything now sounds great, right? Robert F. Kennedy and Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and the Department of Government Efficiency, and I love all of it. But can they survive this struggle with the Blob, the bureaucracy? Because basically what you need is a purge. I mean, we can quibble about maybe a less potentially offensive term, but that's what you need, because exactly what Alexander said. If the leadership is to the right, but the entire rest of the bureaucracy is to the left, it really doesn't matter who's. It goes back to the famous saying, it's not just about who's in office, it's about who's in power. If you do not change the bureaucracy in a way that they are aligned, or at least 3/4 of them are aligned with your ideological vision, nothing is going to change. Now, we see many signs in the US that Trump wants to do this. And if he can do it, I think Europeans will then say, especially the electorate will say, wait a moment, if they across the Atlantic can have actual change, then why can't we? And I think that also the right-wing parties would say, wait a moment, this is really possible. It can really be done. But this is the thing that I'm worried. And you know, that's the thing with Trump. You know him, right? He goes in bombastically, but he has a sensitive side too, and then he gets bad headlines in the New York Times, and he gets bad headlines in the Washington Post, and then will he have the backbone to really see all of this through? I'm hoping for it. I think he could be the man to do it, but we don't know it yet. Okay,
I think the hidden trinity here is Trump, Rubio, and Musk. Vance is the crown prince. He's out the building right now. He's preparing for 2028 and beyond, and he's going to be the leader of the MAGA movement. And he'll basically run around as the leader of the MAGA movement and do a good job and stay there, right? The thing with Rubio and Musk, compared to all the others are a gamble. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. too. You throw in the guy, maybe 3 weeks later, he has to resign because he has to get out of the war because it didn't work with Trump. Or the media, Trump was the wrong one in the sense that it wasn't what he could ride on, but rather what he didn't like. So he gets rid of those guys. And Trump could easily do that. He did that the last time around. He might do it again. But when it comes to Musk and Rubio, those are, because Rubio is not a Trumpite himself, and Musk is neither a Trumpite himself. That's precisely why appointing those two guys to the inner cabinet is a no return. Musk has nowhere to go. He's building the rockets already. They can go all the way to Mars, whatever. His engineers would do it. His mission is fulfilled. He bought Twitter. Biggest loss-making thing ever done. You know what? This 1 week after the election victory, he made more money from Tesla stock than it cost him to buy Twitter. The guy's a fucking genius. When it comes to entrepreneurship business, a genius. Okay, that's the gamble. If Musk and Ramaswamy go in there and start, if they only succeed to do 10th of the sort of slaughtering of the Blob they promised us, this is the new message for the right of Europe. Well, the right of Europe will finally be able to stand up and say, we can slash government too and give the money back to the citizens. And that is both what the citizens want to hear. They want their money back. And two, you get rid of the Blob. So the leftists they're biting in there. They're going to start losing the elections massively. Poilievre will win in Canada. Trudeau won't resign. Okay, then we lose massively next year. We're going to see it turn to the right on a level we've never seen before. It's basically between Le Pen and Bardella to decide who's going to be the next president of France. You nailed the 30% of the French are hysterical leftists into one block now, yeah, and they're 30% and never be more than that. 70% of French people have then agreed that we can rule the country. So it's basically open door now for Marine Le Pen to take over. It's going to be interesting to see. I think I've been prophetic all along by saying that the 2030s will be debate between liberals or conservatives again in the Western world, the way it was in the 19th century. And basically socialism will be thrown out the door because it's no longer a viable option. It's not a credible option to anybody any longer. It's only a small minority that have those dreams. And in the way communism died in the 1990s, socialism will die in the 2030s.
Coming back to the Blob, I think it's relevant to look at then the material aspect of what happens with deep state or people whose main livelihood has been parasitic or siphoning off common resources. But as they are threatened or outright ousted, whole departments being closed down, government authorities, NGO world, the rest of it, or the HR department of companies, name your favorite pet peeve. These people then, if you look at what's the difference between the European culture wars and the US culture wars, one of the reasons why the US culture war has been more fever-pitched is also that you have, I would posit, the student debt to a much larger degree, which means that those people are hyper-sharp and need to compete both against their enemies and obviously internally. This is also something that needs to be remembered, that the left, as it looks today, has been far more severe to its own than to its enemies. And I think this is relevant to look at with regards to what would happen if you would challenge the Blob, and also as the Blob feels challenged. That what we see now are that these antibody reactions. I think the most interesting thing about the Trump election is not what it did, but simply that he was elected, and then to see what the Blob does is almost like this allergic reaction that it had. And by now, we could say, as Alexander listed now, all these prominent people who have constitute a new elite formation. That in and of itself, I think, is interesting. But I think realizing this allergic reaction within Europe is also important to see that you might have another right to coming back to Benedict's point about, or the right, one that would think differently about its relationship to the state. And I think this merits more discussion in the sense that what the left has done in order to have power in a way is I think is a misnomer, but I mention it just so it's stated, the Kerensky principle, that in the run-up to the Bolshevik Revolution, you would have, as it were, quote, no enemies to the left. Obviously, that ended not so well for Kerensky himself, but I think the principle stands. And then the question is, can we see then a no enemy to the right principle emerging now, as you have a right realizing that you cannot only win by being more productive. That is the Musk and the Thiel and the others of the world. But productivity is not going to win against someone who only thinks in zero-sum games of power.
Looking at Europe right now, where the only two formally leftist victories over the last 2 years have been the Social Democrats in Denmark and the Labour government in the UK. And they both swung heavily to the right to win. Tony Blair was back. That's why Labour won. And they might not win the next election because of it, because they're actually already down in the opinion polls. And Denmark, the Social Democrats of Denmark, are proud to be a rightist party these days. They don't even hide it. It seems to me that we are at a position right now where the left can't win elections any longer in Europe. I don't see it happening anywhere, to be honest about it. And in some countries, they become so American that the left is over and done with. Because looking at America from European perspective, it's Social Democrats, they're Democrats, and it's basically the liberals and the conservatives of the right are the Republicans today. And that's why the Republican is also going ahead and being the larger party. I don't know if that fits into your description. And you might want to redress the question even more firmly, Johan, to get to it. But to me, the risk right now is that the left fights back by giving up on democracy entirely because it doesn't benefit them any longer. They were never loyal to it in the first place. And therefore they come back as a sort of revengeful form of socialism that will do anything it can and use our own tax money if they can too as well to try to fight us back.
This I agree with. I think this is definitely one of the things that could happen. And coming back to Ralph's comment on this policing of not unlawful, but unsuitable behavior. But I think that the left could actually make that pivot. If you look at Sweden, for instance, the Social Democratic Party losing votes to the Sweden Democrats, more or less because it is the same party. It just happens to be the Social Democrat in the city and the Social Democrat in the countryside. where the latter then votes for the swing Democrats. Now, a nostalgic voter who would want to maintain the welfare state, I could easily see that if the left of the Social Democratic Party would get rid of woke or this kind of identitarian aspect and then be more materialistic in their take, then they could be far more brutal and effective than the right-wing populism. Obviously, that would need some kind of shedding of skin on part of the left. And I think this is a model that could be fully possible to combine with, say, a more authoritarian use of AI. Look at, for instance, what Budapest actually symbolizes is a more of a chaos algorithm. You throw in people from many different political stripes, Marxists, conservatives, libertarians, and see what comes out. That is more vibrant and fun and attentionalist. But I wonder if that will win out in the short term against someone who's trying to police the discourse, scouring the internet for any kind of language that could be remotely accused of libeling someone. So I think there is still a chance in the short-term period for left-wing parties to entrench their position and also take some of the populist points that the right has done. What the right really is interesting in, and this is not as a claim of how you win elections, but what I think the right could actually do is more of the right of, say, the early modern of the 1600s, that you look at what is good for the state and not a welfare function, but how do you make a state function, and then the people in a way has to be catered to themselves. That is, it's a change of how you build a viable organization that it can be very, if you will, then in the welfare language, brutal towards some of its members, but still vibrant as an organism.
I don't know a single leftist who does the Chinese Cultural Revolution invent non-crime incidents as a crime. I don't know anybody does that without getting paid for it. They're so fucking lazy they need to get paid. And they all live on government money. They're all part of the blob. These activists who call themselves green or socialist or whatever, who do exactly this and who will gladly pursue a police state with the right message and the right mission and then take over everything because people don't understand. And they will go certainly for climate dictatorship or something like that. These are popular ideas among these guys today. Now these ideas, if they should take root, number one, Trump must fail and Musk must fail, because otherwise Musk will give us the weapons we need to kill the blob. And they're all dependent on the blob. They're all sucking their nourishment from the blob. This is why none of these guys are doing it in their spare time. The people who attack me in Sweden don't do it in their spare time. They get paid to do it by the government. At least indirectly, they're all paid. If you go to a leftist champagne cocktail party, you realize that everybody in the room is paid by the public sector to be there. They've become so dependent already on milking the state that unless the state is big, we won't have a problem with them at all because they'll disappear. So I want to make them all unemployed and force them to go out in the private sector and get a fucking job and do something meaningful that actually gets paid because they do something productive. That's where I want to put them. I want everybody to do that. I don't think anybody should deserve to be a citizen unless they can make their own money from a job that's actually productive and creates more value than their mere salary. And this is something people who work for the government have been trying to totally rethink, because they think they're superior to the rest of us and they're employed by the government to teach us and change us into something better than we are. And they use any excuse they can, like climate or anything else, feminism or whatever, to be these preachers. Now they can't win elections any longer. Sure, they get dangerous. But if we're betting on Musk succeeding and Rubio, getting America back in order, when it comes to foreign power against China, then we have an alternative to the Chinese Cultural Revolution and the police state, which is what the socialists will want. They go definitely in the direction where they can't win elections any longer. And the alternative we have against that is exactly the sort of democracy America will stand for, run by a huge tech oligarchy. And at the end of the day, none of those guys in Europe today who want to have a socialist police state have an AI that can't compete even remotely with American AIs that I can work with today. And at the end of the day, wars are won through creativity and productivity. They're not won through messages.
Just to clarify my point here, coming back to the algorithm analogy, and I understand that can be accused of, from a Hegelian reading, the actual is the ideal. But what I mean in this sense is that what the left has at the moment is an algorithm that tries to calculate repression. If the right is to be the right then, in the post-election of this, then it has to have an algorithm that can calculate famish or famine, because even lazy people, when famished, will strike back. And that is what the blob people will become. They will become weaponized. They have to become weaponized or they will die.
The algorithm is useless unless you have the data. And you can only have the data if I give it to you. Now, my data will be collected. That's a given. That's why sociocracy is an absolute must and will happen historically. that I'm fighting for the free and open sociocracy. And everybody I know in Silicon Valley and Austin understands this message now. This is what Tristan Harris, Douglas Juskow, all the Alexander Barnes of America have been doing it for the past 20 years. Where we're at right now is that they've understood that running an oligarchy is acceptable to the world, because if I give my data to 6 different competing American AI clouds, I'm okay with them getting my data. I am never, ever, as a citizen, going to give my data to socialist police state freely. And how the hell are they going to get the data from me if they don't even have a fucking AI? Because they're so fucking incompetent, they can't create one. China at least did it. The Chinese Communist Party has one. Russia doesn't. Iran certainly doesn't. And I don't think Sweden, as a socialist police state, would have one either. And in that case, you know what? Then the tech oligarchs will beat the shit out of the Swedish socialist police state. That's got to be the end game when we look at the end of the century.
But I'm talking about something far simpler. This is more of a crude calculation of how many unemployed men in the age span of 20 to 30 to understand the likelihood of violence in society. If you take these bureaucrats and push them out of the blob into the desert, as it were, they will mobilize. And the question is how you build a civilizational project for the West, as it also has enemies at its borders. If you then go through an albeit necessary, but still troubling period for different constituencies in what are still at least nominal democracies. Because I can definitely see a more radicalized version of the left, might not be woke, but something that reacts to this medicine that Musk and the Trump administration are trying to impose now.
Yeah, they'll be terrorists. That's what they are, those guys. They're terrorists. They're a small minority who are preachers, and when people don't listen to them, they blow up bombs. That's very likely. That's very, very likely. But terrorism won't take over government and run the show. Actually, terrorists are also perfect scapegoats for a good liberal conservative government. But that's very likely, because that's also the 19th century. When the liberals and the conservatives were ruling Europe and America, at the same time, you had these fucking anarchist terrorists blowing up bombs all the time everywhere, just like Islamists and other guys are doing today. So yeah, terror is very likely, but not power.
Okay, so in that sense, you would call them an irritation, but irrelevant.
Whoever owns the drones runs the show from now on historically. We could talk about Russia, Ukraine right now. It's become the first openly drone war. It's all about the drones now from now on. It's not about soldiers, not about male bodies any longer. It's about violence, but it's about computer fucking wizards blowing drones in your face. From now on, that's going to be the case for any war happening historically from now. And whoever controls the drones, it's going to be the government. It's not going to be a terrorist sect, hopefully. Okay, so Joe and I got into this really deeply Marxist discussions because we're the two Marxists of the show right here. But back to Benedict and Ralph. Do you want to sort of round it up? How are we going to fight the war on the blob? Or anything else you want to comment on?
There's a lot to comment on, I would say, about the blob specifically, and maybe comparing the situation in the United States with that in Europe. I see an advantage that the United States has vis-a-vis Europe, but an advantage which is also a danger at the same time, namely that the blob here, the deep state, whatever you call it, is smaller here, or it's more capable of being defeated in the United States, as we see. But that which then also leads to a more violent counter-reaction, which is a danger for the United States. We mentioned the two rights before in Europe. One thing in Europe is that one of those two rights is itself a part of the blob, which means that it's much more difficult to defeat. Now, you do have certain segments of the right here in the United States that are also accused of being part of the blob. There's sometimes truth to that, but I think a lot of that also comes from a particular moral purism that is especially common among the cult of personality Trumpists right now. For example, they accuse somebody like Marco Rubio of being a neocon and a part of the blob and so on, which I think is unfair. In spite of such accusations, I think a much broader segment of the right is outside of the blob in the United States than in Europe, something that is both an advantage and a danger.
No, I think that Benedict is right. And one of the things that we also going to see in this emerging new world order, if you want to use that term, is that historical consciousness will start to play a bigger role again. The Nordic experience is very different, or even the Nordic approach for a plethora of reasons is very different from the rest of Europe, particular, and from the rest of the West in general. As you mentioned before, if you look at the only countries where social democracy is not at a threat of being entirely obliterated, is in Denmark, Sweden, and I guess a little bit Norway as well. Everywhere else, in France and Germany, they might survive for one more legislative period, but they probably be gone by the next. In Austria, in the recent elections, they got the worst results since I think it was 1903. So we can tell they're dying everywhere, metaphorically speaking. except for the Nordic countries, because they put pragmatism first. Or to put it differently, they understood you can be patriotic, socially, or as we would say, actually, you can be nationally liberal and still also be social, but you don't have to sign up to the wokeness and all these kind of things. But the other social democrats in Europe have not understood this. So I think that the pragmatism that you see in Scandinavia is amazing. It's a model one should learn from, but it's very unique. And unfortunately, they're just too small. This is the same problem, by the way, I see with Poland and Hungary. I agree with Alexander. Very interesting stuff going on there. But even taken together for now, they cannot really challenge the crumbling countries of Sweden and Germany, which is why I still have hopes for Giorgia Meloni, because what she does, I think people tend to be, not anybody in this round, people tend to be very unfair towards her, because I think she wants to build something that lasts. And she understands, and this is something I believe that the Hungarians do not understand, that you cannot go to, metaphorically, war with everybody outside your own country and do what you want in your country, but at the same time want to play a global role, because that's the problem of Hungary. They want to be the vanguard of global conservatism, but at the same time, they very often pick unnecessary fights with their non-Hungarian neighbors. And I think Meloni does it smarter. She still knows, even if it's just temporarily, she knows where power rests. She understood that being on good terms with Brussels, with the Biden administration, is not going to harm her. And she maneuvered herself, I think, through the last 4 years quite artfully. Now, as more and more, as Alexander pointed out, and I agree, now that the right-wing wave is picking up speed, is getting stronger, she will still be there. She can ride this wave now, but at the same time is well entrenched. I think she's much smarter than she very often gets credit for.
I think Meloni is a fantastic politician, and I trust her, and she's popular. People trust her.
I think also, Ralph, that you're correct in the sense that for Europe, a change in what the populist movement achieved in terms of who came to power and who was attracted to it, that there are, I think, many of the paradoxes of the populist movement that will become apparent in the years to come. One, of course, being that they've been failed to deliver on results. I'm thinking, of course, of farmer revolts, with the exception of Netherlands. But while the revolts were manifested, many of the elite formations were not, or at least still incipient to actually make a difference. And I think that realization also changes the power dynamic around how you build the governments. But that's just one thing. Another one is also that the Hungarian revolt, and I think it is only that, in the sense that the Hungarian approach to politics seems to be that they have to choose which side is going to lose, and then you join that. But that has more to do with a particular history of that country.
That's just real quick, because I think you're 100% right. And that's the unfortunate, maybe a strong term, but that's a little bit the problem that Poland and Hungary play such a prominent role, because they hate if you say that, but I think it's true. And I say this from a place of deep affection and love for both of these countries. But historically, they have never been very skillful alliance builders or very skillful diplomats. And Poland has a tendency to do it again. It's the one country that has a tendency to antagonize a powerful neighbor to the west and a powerful neighbor to the east, which I would say strategically is not, or diplomatically, is not necessarily the smartest thing you can do. Because you never know if there won't be a day in the next 30 years where Berlin and Moscow shake hands and say, the Poles have been partitioned 3 times in their history. What does it matter if they're going to be partitioned a 4th time? Diplomacy means that you have to prepare for this. And yes. Hungary, in a similar fashion, right? It's that very often it's an unfortunate situation that those who understood the world as it is now very often have such a historical baggage that they cannot, I believe, maneuver and diplomatically move forward as efficiently as they could. And the last point that I think is very crucial, which I enjoyed tremendously, the right-wing movement, to some extent, and if we take the UK into this as well, is a feminine movement, like in a positive sense, because it demonstrates to you that the reactionary right-wingers have no problem with a strong woman if the beliefs of those strong women align with their own beliefs. I don't care at all that Meloni and Le Pen are a woman, that Badenoch is a woman of color, and I don't care that Alice Weidel of the AfD is a lesbian woman. Like, I don't care if they execute the policies they promise. They could be transgender for all I care.
I think this is hidden strength of right. And there's one thing I want to say before we round up today as well. The perfect hidden question that nobody talks about is, of course, Israel and the Middle East. The vast majority of European voters think that Israel is doing the dirty job for everybody else. The vast majority of Arabs think that Israel is doing the dirty job for everybody else. Marco Rubio knows perfectly well the mullahs of Iran are the source of all this bullshit. And the Islamic State, the Hamas or Hezbollah, doesn't make any difference. It's the same fucking shit. Okay? Needs to be extradited. Needs to be go extinct, right? So Israel's doing the dirty job for everybody. Arabs know this. That's why you don't have these massive pro-Palestinian demonstrations in the Arab world. You have them in Europe. Why? Because the left is playing this one card. The card the establishment are playing, this includes the Swedish Social Democrats, includes all of them, is they be pro-Palestinian. And they take the pictures from their TV screens of children dying and crying in Gaza, which of course is horrible, but it's also excluding pictures of people dying and crying in Sudan, because Sudan doesn't have any journalists, no cameras, no microphones, because in Sudan it's Arabs killing blacks, and the left are racists. They're genuinely racist. They're only interested in the sensation of a conflict if a Jew is involved. They don't care about Arab conflict. They only care about Gaza because Jews are involved in the conflict. This is the anti-Semitism of the left. People know this. They keep quiet. They vote for defeat. They love Israel for doing the dirty job. That's what I think is actually going on subconsciously in Europe at the moment. And the right that is aware of this and is good enough to stand with Israel at this moment are going to gain so much credibility from the 2030s. But the people who play into the whole pro-Palestinian card, including Macron and all these guys, the establishment, the entire left, and all these so-called liberals and conservatives who are playing into the left all the time, the entire blob is pro-Palestinian. It's a clear-cut case if you look at it right now. So I just have that as a test question. And the answer is stunning. It's so clearly one or the other for people.
All right, gentlemen. I never thought I would say this, but this is just the beginning. So I'm pretty sure that we will have plenty of surprises in store for the near and the long future. And I can think of no better constellation to talk about those than with you. And obviously our best wishes go to Carl and the next generation being born into this very exciting world, to use the agnostic language we have learned by now. That's it for tonight.
Thank you so much, guys. Lovely to be with you.
Thank you.